Hey there, friend. Welcome back, and welcome to the second part of the series that I am running with Simona on her podcast as it relates to podcasting. So as a quick reminder, for 4 weeks, you are actually getting access to this exclusive episodes that I did with Simona and her listeners about leveraging paid ads to boost a podcast. So last week, we talked all about the foundations, really just getting ready to run ads for your podcast, where today we're taking it a step further and we're actually talking about the structure of an ad. And we're going to go through different types of ads that you can place for your podcast. So I'm super excited for you to dive in. Let's get right to it.
Hi, Lisa. Welcome back to the As It Relates to Podcasting podcast. Today, we're talking all about how to structure high converting ads. And I'm so excited to get your perspective on this.
Hey, Simona. Thanks so much for having me back. I'm excited.
As we continue this series all about advertising, I want podcasters to know exactly how to use ads with their podcast to get more listenership, to increase their downloads, and ultimately just to have more amazing people listening to their show. So in this video in specific, we're going to be touching on a bunch of different things. But the first thing that I want to talk about, and let me know where you think is the best place to start, when it comes to like the 3 levels of ad copy or the types of ads. Where do you think we should begin?
Mm-hmm. So let's do a quick little recap. So in the last series, I mentioned what you need to have prepped basically to get ready for your ads, whether that's making sure that you have your Facebook and Instagram business accounts set up, understanding who you're talking to. That's going to come into play a lot right here. Mm-hmm. And then also we did touch on the different types of graphics and videos. So I'm going to dive a little bit more into that. But let's actually start with the videos and the graphics to begin. Perfect. Then we'll get into actually how do you write the actual ad copy.
I love it.
All right. So in the last episode, we talked about 3 different types of ads that I always like to start running when I'm starting from scratch. So if you are looking to just get more downloads on your podcast, you're actually going to be running ads on the back end of Facebook using Meta Business Manager. So in order to run those types of ads, there's some prep work that you need to do. You need to make sure that you have your ad copy, and you need to make sure that you either have a graphic or a video to go with it. So Simona, you asked a great question in the last episode, whether you should be doing videos or whether people should be doing images. And you actually mentioned that most people do images. However, right now we know that in social media, videos are really, really popular. Videos are what are getting the most engagement, the most views, etc. That does not mean that is the most effective ad that you can be running. So I mentioned that there's 3 different types of ads that I like to run. I like to run a video ad. I like to run a long form ad. So the text copy is a longer version, way longer than most people would ever even think of writing, with a still image. And then a short version of an ad with a still image. The reason why, again, I like to do that is it gives me the ability to test to see what my audience likes. I could place the exact same ad on my account and your account, and we're going to get totally different results because we're targeting different people and our audience interacts with us differently.
Right.
So with the video ads, there's multiple ways that you can run video ads. You can have a reel as an ad. You can have an ad that shows up only in stories on Instagram and Facebook. You can have a video that is a horizontal video that is more like a promotion of your ad or your podcast. You could have just short clips of your podcast episodes. You could have a voiceover. You can just do the audio. There's different types of videos that you can be running on social media, and it really comes down to, and I said it last episode, this is going to get annoying, it comes down to testing. So you can have the same video, okay? So let's just say I have a video of me promoting my podcast. I could have that same video in a version that is horizontal, and then I could crop that video and make it a story ad. So we all know on social media, a story is the vertical one versus the horizontal ad. So when you're choosing your video ads, it really comes down to playing with a few different things. And I wanted to touch on this because it's important, and I feel like it's a question I get asked a lot. When you're choosing a video ad, should you do the story ads only? Should you do a reel only? Or should you do the horizontal video? Again, it comes down to testing. And what actually happens when you're placing the ad on the back end of Facebook, which we'll get into, when you're placing it, you can actually have one ad campaign showing all 3 videos in the different placements on social media. That way you're not just saying, hey, only put this vertical ad out there, this vertical video that looks like a reel, only put that out there. If it shows up on someone's feed, it's not going to look that great. So you can actually distinguish and tell social media where to place these different videos. Another thing when it comes to video specifically is the length. So right now, short videos are getting a lot more attention. Under that 15 seconds. The reason why, from a reel perspective, let's say, if you have a video that is 15 seconds long, people have to watch it multiple times in order to capture what you're actually saying.
Right.
So from an organic engagement side of things, people have to watch it multiple times, meaning they're going to get more views on the video, then it's going to help you see more, or more people see the video. From an ad perspective, those still work extremely, extremely well. However, it comes down to testing what works for your audience. I have an ad running that is a minute long that converts better than a 15-second video. I have clients that have a 5-minute video running that converts extremely, extremely well versus the 15-second video.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it all comes back to understanding who you're talking to, what they like on social media, but also what is the overall goal. The longer videos work extremely well if you really need to educate someone. So if your podcast episode is something totally random that you really need to educate why this is even important for them to listen to, the longer videos may be best. If it's a podcast that is pretty straightforward, those short videos could be working.
Okay. So when we think of video ads, different lengths obviously is so key to pay attention to and to keep in mind. The one question that I have though for you is, if you're creating all these different video ads, what would be like the number one do and the number one don't that you would suggest people in terms of starting their video to make sure that you're capturing the audience's attention? Because a lot of the times I think that people will say, they'll put fluff in the beginning, right? So like how important is it to like get to that hook right away? And also, do you suggest always starting with a hook? Do you think it's always necessary?
Yes. So even if you're writing the ad copy or doing your video copy, you need to have that hook and you need to grab someone's attention within the first 3 seconds.
Okay.
So one big mistake that I see people make is, when they like to have their logo pop in and slowly get in, it's like this whole like entertainment thing.
Yeah.
You've already lost someone.
They're
lost,
gone.
They're way gone. Like, don't do that. If you want to have your logo in it, put it at the bottom corner of your video or leave it to the end, which still people are not going to sit there and watch it.
Mm-hmm. It's so true.
No one's going to watch it. Then you lose that video view too.
Exactly. Yeah. I even think about this like with YouTube, for example, also. I mean, when you're even just on YouTube, when you start out your podcast episode, like it doesn't have to have a trailer on every single, like to begin every single episode. You know what I mean? Like just get to the point.
Yeah. And actually, I don't know if you've noticed, but on my podcast, what I've been testing recently is I have the hook right off the bat. Mm-hmm. Then I do the kind of little fluff just to have that conversation. And then I will repeat that hook.
It's good.
So it's like the people who are just trying to decide at that point, do you want to watch this? Do you want to listen to this? Whatever. It gives them that opportunity to know exactly what it's about. And then you can go into the episode.
I love that.
So it doesn't have to be a trailer like you said, but it needs to be, here's exactly what you're getting and here's why it's important for you. That's it.
That's perfect. Now, what types of other ads would you consider running? So obviously we have the video ads, which are clearly very important right now. And I think we're going to see too a lot more of that as it continues on, especially into the new year, into 2023 and beyond, to be honest, because I think that people are starting to realize the value of video content. Mm-hmm. And so in addition to that, what would you recommend from an ad perspective for your podcast?
Yeah. So not every single person likes video. That's another key to know, is some people, they don't have their sound on at a certain point, or maybe they can't have a sound. So video ads, not all the time, are the most effective depending, again, who you're talking to. So an alternative to videos is going to be an image. So an image of you, or what you could test, and test is that key word that you're going to take away from all these episodes, test. You have the option of doing your cover photo for your podcast. So that alone is going to start to create that brand awareness though. When people start to see your cover photo for your podcast, they start to see that podcast cover photo on Spotify, let's say, they're going to start to just recognize you. That's one thing that you can test. However, a more effective ad is going to be an image of you. Maybe it's a selfie of you just, hey, I'm shooting a podcast episode right now. That is going to come across a lot better than a podcast cover photo. And the reason why is because people get to see you behind the scenes. And it's the same thing with anything in your business. People want to know behind the scenes. They want to know the person. They want to know why you're doing this. They want to know what you're all about. What is your personality? Yeah, on your podcast, they can hear it slightly. But if you just have a cover photo up there and you're trying to get someone new, they have no idea who you are at this point. So let them into who you are in an image of yourself. Selfie, professional image does not really matter at this point. Just take an image to show the behind the scenes aspects. All right, let's pause for a quick second. I wanted to jump in here real quick and let you know I am currently accepting applications for my Rise coaching program. So if you've been sitting on the sidelines waiting for me to open up more space, today is your lucky day. The Rise coaching program is where you get to work with me one-on-one for a minimum of 3 months up to 12 months to ensure that all your systems, your processes, your digital marketing are on point this year. So if you are an entrepreneur looking for step-by-step guidance and really that second pair of eyes on your strategy, and if you're ready to leverage digital marketing to its fullest, I would love for you to head on over to coaching.lisaann.ca and apply for the one-on-one Rise coaching program. Anyways, I told you I'd be quick, so let's get right back to the episode.
Interesting. So you think it's totally fine to like take like a selfie? I mean, of course you want it to be like like not like a grainy selfie or something like that. Like it has to be like a clear photo. But you think that would be an effective way to get people. I guess that makes a lot of sense though, because people are resonating with you as the person as opposed to like a polished brand.
And yeah, and you know what? Going back to just the videos, even when I'm running videos and testing for my clients, the videos of them walking down the street doing a selfie video on their phone converts better than hiring a videographer and having this fancy equipment and everything, because people relate to you better.
Right.
But it really, really does, like it depends, of course, on what brand image you want to put out there too. Like if you have this high luxury brand, sure, test it. Test both. But I bet you coming across as a human being, that you're just an average person that they can relate to, that they can go to the bar with or have dinner with or whatever, hang out with, they're going to want to connect with you even more.
I love that. That's so key. Okay, so we have video ads and we have photo ads, and within both of those categories, a million different options really on how you want to run it. Like you said, it takes so much testing to make sure that, it's hitting the right people, you're targeting the people that you actually want to be reaching, it's converting, it's resonating. When you think of the different types of ads as well, I know we touched on briefly like story ads, shorter ads, longer ads. I'm curious your thoughts there as well.
Yeah. Okay. So once you have the video or the image, and you're going to be testing both of them, the next step is the actual copy of the ad. So there's different lengths of copy that you're going to test. Again, test, I'm sorry, that's an annoying word today, but you're always going to test different copy. You're going to test a short copy and a long copy.
Okay.
So the main difference between a short and a long one is the actual length. So when it comes to writing ads though, the actual ad copy, there's 3 levels regardless of the length. And then I'll get into different types of ads. So the 3 levels of an ad: the hook, which we briefly talked about with your videos. Then you have the value, and then you have a call to action. Same thing when you're actually running your podcast. You have a hook, you have the value of the episode, and at the end, you're asking them to do whatever, whether that's subscribe or whatever it's going to be for your podcast. Okay, so for an example from a hook perspective, if I am doing a podcast or an ad for myself, for my podcast, the More Than Social podcast, I could say a bad example is, you know what, I started a podcast, the More Than Social podcast, to be able to help more entrepreneurs achieve X, Y, Z. If you saw that on a post, a social media post, an ad, doesn't really matter. If you saw that, you know that I'm talking about my podcast, why I started it. If you already know those two things, there's no way that you're going to read the rest of my posts. I've already given you everything.
Right.
So instead, what I could say is, here's exactly why I started my podcast. That's it. And then I go into the next line.
Instead of giving everything away right at the beginning, right up front.
Exactly. So that leads into the value portion. So the hook, I grab their attention. If they're curious about why I started my podcast, they're going to click that read more and they're going to start to read the content. Versus me saying, I'm just like vomiting out everything that I want to say in the first sentence. No one is going to read. The entire purpose of someone reading the actual ad copy or the content on your podcast episodes doesn't really matter. The reason why they're listening to it is because you've intrigued them. And the entire goal of the middle section of your ad is getting them to read the call to action at the very end to take that next step with you. So you have the hook, you have the value, the call to action. So the hook, again, make sure that you're grabbing someone's curiosity. You're not vomiting everything out in the first sentence. You're encouraging them to want to read more. As soon as they click on that read more, that is when you start to build that value-based content. So this is where it's really going to affect how long or short the ad is going to be. Okay, so with the value-based content, what you're doing is you're not coming across and listing all the features of your podcast. I'm not saying, hey, here's why I started my podcast, and then they want to read more, and then I'm going, because it's going to increase my revenue, because it's going to do this, because it's this. I'm not coming across and listing features. I'm coming across as a human being and hitting on the emotional standpoint. Mm-hmm. So with the value-based content that you put in your ad, you're speaking to that dream client of yours. You're touching on their pain points, but also being a human being behind it. So for example, my dream client, she's on social media, she's doing the do, and she hates it. So I said, here's why I started my podcast, the More Than Social podcast. Blank, ... next line. I started the podcast because I understand that there's so many entrepreneurs out there just like you who are on social media all the time, but they would rather throw their phone in the water. They would rather disconnect. They would rather not have to think about getting ready and taking a photo or a video. I started this podcast because I know that there's many people like that, and I have the solution for it because I'm able to teach you how to automate your social media. I'm able to teach you how to grow your podcast without having to live on social media 24/7. I'm teaching how people don't have to be an influencer when they're a business owner because we don't have time for that. See what I did there? I connected it to my dream client. What is she going through? What is she struggling with? And what does she want? But that is true for me too.
Exactly.
That is why I started my podcast.
Exactly.
To help other entrepreneurs scale their business using automation. So it's like, I'm not listing all the features. And just to give you an even simpler example, not related to podcasts, a car. If you're thinking about a car, you're not necessarily going, okay, like, yes, it's important to think I want 4-wheel drive, a sunroof, et cetera, but that's not why people buy a car. They can buy different brands, a Ford versus a BMW, let's say. They're getting into it from the feeling that they're getting by being in that car. So same thing with the value, your podcast, ads, anything. You want to speak to that value in that emotional connection.
I love that.
Okay, so we have the hook, we have the value, which is talking to that dream client, and the last piece is the call to action. And this is something that 99% of people actually miss, and they feel uncomfortable doing it. If you're not telling someone what to do next, they're not going to do anything. And then people ask, well, why am I not getting people clicking on the link to go to my podcast? Why am I not getting people to subscribe to my podcast? Why am I not getting people to answer the questions about what topics they want me to talk about on my podcast? Well, did you ask them?
Right.
Most of the time not.
Right.
So the last piece of the puzzle, again, doesn't matter the length at this point. The last piece of the puzzle is that call to action. You need to tell them exactly what to do, and it needs to be super clear. I find when people start to really think about call to actions, they get so overwhelmed and they try to be creative and fancy. No one needs to be fancy. No one needs to be super creative. If you want them to click a link, say, click the link below.
Just ask.
just ask. Yeah. And tell them, click the link below and subscribe.
It's so true though. I always used to like make it this big thing every time I would put the call to action in anything that I would write. And then finally I was like, forget this. I was like, I'm just going to literally tell you exactly what I want. you to do, next step I want you to take, or whatever. And people prefer that, you know what I mean? Because they're not having to decipher what your ask is amongst all of the other things that you've just thrown at them.
Exactly.
I want to ask you, so from the perspective of these different ad types and the three levels, the three levels of creating your copy, you'll have copy that's a little bit longer, you'll have copy that's a little bit shorter, and you'll have, different types of ads. Now, would you recommend for someone who maybe is just starting out with their advertising for their podcast, would you recommend that they maybe create like 3 different ads? Let's say one, or let's say 4 different ads, one longer video, one shorter video, one curated photo, and one more lifestyle type of photo, and then have different, maybe 4 different types of copy, let's say, and then testing that way. And then on the flip side, how long do you test for before you sort of realize what's working and what's not?
So you don't want to create multiple ad copies. You just want to trim the fat on some of them.
Okay.
So for example, and same thing with a video, you don't want to have 2 completely different videos to begin with. You want to have the same video. It's just a short form and a long form, but same topic, same hook, same education in the middle of it. It's just you trim the fat and it's shorter.
Okay.
Okay. And the reason why you always want to test 2 things at the same time, always. It doesn't matter if you have the perfect ad that is getting you 1 million downloads, you're always going to be testing. And you always test 2 things at a time because you know what's working. So if I'm going to place an ad, and let's say I start with the video formats, that's the one I want to start with. I'm going to run the exact same ad copy, but I'm going to run the short form video and the long form video. Then you're going to see what one works best. To answer the question of how long you wait, 7 to 10 days, depending on how much you are spending. Okay. So 7 to 10 days is like that sweet spot with Facebook. It allows you to get out of the learning phase is what it's called. Basically what happens is every single day, based on who you're targeting with ads, Facebook's going to put that ad on Instagram or Facebook and put it in front of different buckets of people based on your target. So over those 7 days, it's gone through all the buckets of people that they created for you, and now they understand who is taking the action you want them to take, aka click on the link to subscribe to your podcast. So over those 7 days to 10 days, you have 2 different ads running, and it will tell you your audience is clicking and subscribing to your podcast with the long form video versus the short form. If you know that, fantastic, great. Now I know I'm going to start with the long form video. And maybe the next thing that I'm going to test is the length of the copy. So let's say that on those ones, you used a short copy that had the hook, quick little dot shots of why you started your podcast, and a call to action to subscribe. The next one I could do a longer form. And instead of having just point forms where let's say I have a check, I started it because I want to teach people how to get off social media. Check, I started it because people are wasting too much time. Check, like just my quick little bullet points.
Yeah.
Like what you do on your show notes. You have your quick little overviews. So that's what you can use to test. But now the second variation with the long form video that I know that my audience was clicking mostly on, then I could have the long form. So instead of having the point forms, I'm actually going a little bit more in depth into that. I'm having more emotion behind it. So instead of saying, check mark, start it because too many people are wasting time on social media, I could say, I understand that there's people out there who feel like they're just wasting time on social media because they're not generating more podcast subscribers. I want to be the solution for them. I'm just, literally same point, I'm just expanding on it.
So good.
Okay,
I love that so much.
So that would be the next thing, but I'm still running the same video ad, but now I'm testing the short form copy and the long form copy. I let that run for 7 to 10 days. Then it's going to tell me what one works better. Okay, so now at this point, we know the long form video works best with the longer form ad copy. Okay, so I'm going to shut off any of the short form stuff. Now I understand my audience a bit more so I can move forward. Now, instead of doing the video with the long form, I'm going to test a picture of me, a selfie of me doing my podcast, and testing that with the exact same copy. So to go back to your question, should people start with 4 different ad copies or videos or pictures, whatever? You can have them prepped, absolutely. I always have 3 ad copies and 3 different pieces of graphics, so video or picture. I'll have those ready, so in the queue. So I don't have to think about it when I'm testing different things. I'm just throwing in different combinations.
I think that is absolutely genius. I think that's so valuable for those who are listening right now. And I think that this provides a lot of value for people in a very tangible way to actually create ads on their podcast, and that it's actually not as overwhelming as it may seem or may sound. So I think that this is so helpful and so beneficial. Is there anything that you feel like we might be missing from the structure of creating these high converting ads? We are going to dive into a little bit more in our next video, but I just wanted to double check before we end this video today.
The only last type of ad that I haven't touched on is that story format that you brought up.
Right.
So there's a difference between a long form ad that talks about why you started your podcast and a persuasive story. So storytelling is huge, huge, huge in anything that you do with marketing. People want to understand the story behind why you started your podcast. So these are typically longer form ads, like I'm talking about 1,000 words plus, sometimes 2,000 words. But the key with your story, you're still following the same format of you have your hook, you have your value, you have your call to action. But instead of saying, this is why I started my podcast and list all the reasons, you're going to start with a story. So instead, my hook would be, I never really thought I would ever start a podcast, ... But it was once I got to a level in my business that I was already doing YouTube. I was already having my clients. I was already giving a lot of value, but I knew I wasn't giving everything that I could to my audience, that I started to look for other methods within my business to grow. Then one day I went to an event with one of my friends, and she introduced me to a lady or girl named Simona. And when I met Simona, it was kind of like this light bulb moment. It was like, you know what? I wasn't planning to start it then, my podcast. I had zero ideas. I knew I wanted to do that next step, but it was kind of like a future goal. Yeah, I'm going to do this one day. I understand that's the next step in my business. But then I met Simona and I was like, you know what? This kind of just landed in my lap. She just landed here and it was my sign to just start it. So I reached out to Simona, I think it was maybe 2 weeks later, and I said, you know what? I've been thinking about starting my podcast. Here's my idea. What do you think? What do I need to do? That was over a year ago now, or just about a year ago now. And ever since I started my podcast, I have started to love it. I have really started to enjoy it because it gives me another way to talk to my audience. It gives me another way to help people just like you to be able to scale their business without having to live on social media. It helps people be able to scale their podcasts so they can monetize it. And I start going into the same reasons as the short form ad copy that I had. Same reasons, but I started with why I started my podcast in the first place. Then at the end, it could be the exact same call to action. If you want to check out my podcast, I know it will really help benefit you. It changed my life, so I hope it changed your life too. If it's something that you're interested in, click the link below and subscribe to my podcast.
I love it. I think that's such an important way to differentiate between the different ad types. I love that you incorporate this idea of story, because I think storytelling is such an important part of what you do as a podcaster, right? And also the story that you're telling every time you show up on the online space, regardless if it's in a paid ad format or even an organic format, right? You are still at the end of the day telling a story. And I think that resonates with a lot of people. So I absolutely love this. Lisa, thank you so much for bringing us through all of these different ways to structure your ads. I think this is so valuable. Is there anything else that you feel like we're missing before we dive into the different types of ads to run?
No, just remember the 3 levels of the ads. Have the hook, have the value, have the call to action, and test.
And
then
test.
Ads are easy from there.
And
just test.
test. That's like literally the keyword of the whole series.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome. Hey friend, remember, this is just the second week of the 4-part series. Over the next 2 weeks, I'll take you a couple steps further. So this week, we went into the different types of ads that you can be running and building for your podcast, how to run video versus still images ads, and then even talked about that 3 structure. The next step is actually running the ads. So next week, I'm going to break down the different types of ads that you can run for your business. The week after that, just to give you a sneak peek, I'm going to get into how do you generate leads from your podcast. As always, if you do have any questions during this time, feel free, reach out to me on social media at Lisa Ann Coaching. And if you have specific podcast questions, yes, I have my podcast, but I'm going to direct all those questions to Simona. So I will put her Instagram in the show notes for you below. That way you can reach out to her directly. But regardless, have the best day and thanks for hanging out with me.